and respected members of the GIFT community, it gives me great pleasure to announce the commencement of the 8th GULATI Commemoration Lecture, the flagship annual event of the GULATI Institute of Finance and Taxation. Today, we gather to honor the enduring legacy of late Professor I.S. GULATI, a brilliant scholar whose contributions to public finance and the Kerala economy continue to illuminate our path forward. His work as a distinguished policymaker and public intellectual has left an indelible mark on our field. Over the years, the GULATI Memorial Lecture has blossomed into a prestigious forum for intellectual discourse greeted by luminaries such as Professor M. Govindarao, Professor Vinod Vyasulu, Professor K.K. George, Professor M.A. Uman, Professor Sushil Khanna, Professor T.M. Thomas Isaac, and Professor Deepak Nair, who have explored critical dimensions of national and subnational development issues from the lens of public finance. To commence the proceedings, I invite Professor K.J. Joseph, Director of GIFT, to deliver the welcome address.
Respected Professor T.M. Thomas Isaac, who, as you all know, our former finance minister and our distinguished professor here. We have been expecting Honorable Finance Minister and Chairman of GIFT to be here, but unfortunately he's down with, he's not keeping well, so he could not make it. He conveys his regret and as well as his best wishes to all of you. I understand that family members of GULATI, Professor I.S. GULATI has joined, especially Madam GULATI is there online. Colleagues, friends and students of Professor I.S. GULATI, I note the presence of his colleagues like Professor K.P. Kannan, Professor A.V. Jose, Professor Pushpangadan, Professor Mudalipan, and many others. And I also note the presence of his students over here. And I must also say that Professor V.K. Ramchandran, who was the successor of Professor I.S. GULATI in the planning board, has a greater inability to join us because he is currently now boarding a flight. So otherwise he would have been here. I also note the presence of the faculty members from different universities, especially Kerala University, and students from different colleges, both online and offline. My colleagues from GIFT and students, ladies and gentlemen. I consider it a great privilege and a source of immense pleasure to welcome all of you to the 8th I.S. GULATI Memorial Lecture, the flagship annual event of GULATI Institute of Finance and Taxation. This lecture, as you are all aware, has been instituted by GIFT in honor and memory of late Professor I.S. GULATI, who was an eminent scholar, policymaker of repute, an acclaimed public intellectual, widely known for his scholarship on issues in the area of public finance in general and issues specific to Kerala economy in particular. And he has held important positions in the country as member of the Finance Commission, as member of important committees appointed by national government as well as government of Kerala and government of Karnataka, chairman of IIM Calcutta, so on and so forth. As you may be aware, Professor I.S. GULATI was born in the northwestern Frontier province, which is now in Pakistan. I'm saying it all for the younger generation. For many of you, I.S. GULATI may not be a familiar name. His family migrated to New Delhi and he worked there in the government as a clerk as a lower position. After that, he secured a fellowship to pursue his PhD studies in London School of Economics, and he undertook his PhD research under the guidance of one of the world-renowned public finance expert called Professor Alan Peacock. On returning to India, he joined the University of Baroda, where he started his teaching profession. And that actually gave him an opportunity to meet Professor Leela Gulati. She's over there. And Professor Leela Gulati is the wife of Professor S. Gulati. Later in 1956, when the first communist government was formed, he was invited by the first our chief minister to help the government in preparing our budget. In 1972, he was invited to he joined Center for Development Studies at the instance of renowned and economist Professor Ken Raj, where he worked for long until his passing away in 2002, and he helped grooming the next generation of economists in the country. And we have among them Professor Thomas Isaac sitting here. You will also find Professor Sri Hasib Rabu, the former finance minister of Jammu and Kashmir. And I also note now Professor Ken Harilal, the chairman of the 7th State Commission on State Finance, and so on and so forth. And I must also note that the today's leading public finance economists in the country, particularly young, KP Kannan, Pinaki Chakravarti and Lekha Chakravarti are two scholars worked under his supervision. And I must also add that he has groomed, in a sense, much noted public finance expert, Professor K.K. George. I must say that I am also his student, and he took the course on trade and balance of payment. And in fact, he took the trade and balance of payment course in an entirely different manner than what I attended the course of Edward Lemur or T.N. Srinivasan in Yale. And I had the privilege of continuing teaching that course after his superannuation from CDS, in CDS. As a member of the 7th Finance Commission, and I said various committees appointed by the union government and the state government, he has worked on a wide range of issues, particularly on the issues of taxation and public finance. When it comes to public finance, he has been concerned about increasing centralization, and he was very much with the states. And that concern and that challenge even now continues. And in fact, our honorable finance minister and all the finance ministers, also our current finance minister, is earnestly taking this campaign of making the case for a better fiscal federal relations. Recently, he organized a conclave of finance ministers to deliberate on the deteriorating center-state financial relations. And in fact, our state is the first one to move to the Supreme Court in India's fiscal federal history to uphold the constitutionally given right to public borrowing. Now, Professor Gulati undertook research on many issues. In many areas, he was a pioneer, I would say. In the area of, he was in the area of pioneer researcher in the area of corporate finance, on aging, on social security, oil prices and debt, public distribution system, of course, decentralization, migration, remittance, and so on and so forth. And concerning remittance, he had a very interesting argument saying that for export earning, Government of India has provision for huge subsidies, but what the poor workers get is actually nothing, only exemption from income tax. In fact, in GIFT, we have extended this argument from Professor Gulati, and in fact, wherein we argued that Kerala model is indeed an model of export-oriented human capital production, wherein I will sum up in one sentence, this is a model wherein the union government benefited, other states benefited, people of Kerala benefited, but government of Kerala lost because human capital, unlike physical capital, is not taxable. So we have been extending this argument now. Professor Gulati served as I said, vice chairman of the Kerala State Planning Board, 2 terms under the LDF government. And Professor Isaac always used to say that he was a guiding spirit, of course, with our first chief minister of the state, E.M.S. Namboodiripad. They were the guiding spirit in his decentralization movement that Professor Isaac led in the state. And he has published widely, in EPW, he would have written hundreds of articles, and he has written many editorials. And His pioneered, the first article which he published was on corporate finance. It appeared in 1956. And I'm very happy to note that aptly, the last article in EPW was jointly with Ross Isaac on EMS as a revolutionary intellectual. So I would say that I feel that a commemoration of a great individual like Professor I.S. Gulati will be incomplete without telling you briefly about the family that he has left behind. Professor Leela Gulati, wife of Professor I.S. Gulati, who I said they met in Baroda. She was a highly acclaimed sociologist, has undertaken pathbreaking research on less privileged women in our country. While Professor Gulati was concerned about remittances, Mrs. Gulati was concerned about the women who are left behind by the migrants. And she was concerned about the women who received never the attention of the researchers like fisherwomen, women in the quarry, in the rock breaking, women, and in all these some of the important publications, her son, Mithu Gulati, joined Professor Leela Gulati. Now, briefly about Priya. Priya Gulati is the daughter of I.S. Gulati. She's a PhD in socio-medical sciences from Columbia University and a Global Equity Fellow at Harvard University. She was a former professor at the Global South at Georgetown University. She held visiting positions in various, southern African countries like Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, and he has been a consultant. So I'm trying to say that her tradition of concerned about less developed regions, countries, and people was carried forward by his daughter also. Now coming to Mithu Gulati, son of Professor Gulati, educated at Chicago, Yale University, and later at Harvard Law School. He's an outstanding scholar in the area of law and economics, and currently a professor at the Virginia University Law School. Earlier, he was a faculty at the Duke University Law School, Georgetown Law School, and the University of Los Angeles. And he's renowned for his cutting-edge research in the area of sovereign debt restructuring and contracts, exploring how to help countries under financial stress. In fact, I was thinking that we must invite Mithu Gulati to Kerala to see how we can get rid of our current fiscal stress. The opening lecture, see, as you know, Professor I.S. Gulati left us in 2002, May 20th, and leaving behind a void that none could indeed fill up. And on his departure, Gulati Institute of Finance and Taxation, at the instance of his student and ardent admirer, Professor T.M. Thomas Isaac, who is chairing the session, started Gulati commemoration lecture. And we are very happy to note that, as Riju rightly said, the previous speaker, starting from the eminent public finance scholar of the country, Professor M. Govind Rao, and last lecture was delivered by Professor Deepak Nair, and we were fortunate to have very eminent scholars to deliver this lecture. And today, I'm very happy that I must say that I, on behalf of all of you, are assembled over here, online and offline. I take this occasion to salute my respected teacher and the person on whose name this institute has been established. Today, we are fortunate to have Professor Ole Tornquist, Professor Emeritus of Political Science and Development Research at Oslo University, Norway, to deliver the 8th Gulati Memorial Lecture. Educated at the universities of Gothenburg and Uppsala, Professor Tornquist has undertaken wide-ranging research on democracy and development in countries in the global south, including Indonesia, Malaysia, in Southeast Asia, and other countries in Africa and Latin America. In Indonesia, he coordinated a major research program with the democracy movement over there. His experience across the world enabled him to approach various issues and development in the global south in a comparative perspective using the lens of social democracy. A close associate and admirer of Professor I.S. Gulati, Professor Tornquist has been a close observer and frequent visitor to Kerala with a large number of close friends in Kerala. I know how many people with whom he had dinner with. I was feeling, that is indicative of, I would say, the some similarity between Kerala genes and Scandinavian genes. And I think I must say that I feel extremely comfortable with Ole Tongist or Bendake Lundwal or Ola Viken or all my other, I mean, they all hold important positions in their area of research, but so-called hello, of which normally academicians hold, they are very, 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 very noble and very humane individuals. Okay, Professor Alec Tongist has published very widely 24 books, and he has collaborated with the scholars across the world, particularly Global South and North. And he has been a close observer of Kerala, and he has been visiting Kerala from mid-90s onwards until the breakup of, yeah, 80s and until the breakout of the pandemic. His recent book is titled Search in Search of Social Democracy, on which in GIFT we had a very enlightening discussion. Professor Tongist is going to deliver the 8th Gulati Memorial Lecture on a highly relevant question. Will Kerala's knowledge-based development lose out to conservative nationalism? I'm very confident that the insights that Professor Tongist going to bring out will be of much use for addressing our development concerns over here. Professor Tongist, with immense appreciation, great expectation, and thanks, I welcome you on behalf of all those who have joined for this lecture, both online and offline, and the GIFT community. As I said, I'm sorry that Professor, my chairman could not be here. He was really keen on joining, and in fact, he was actually discussing about what he will be talking in this lecture. He was very much, but he's running very high fever. That's what I was told, and he's not able to make it. And I must say that we have a chair today. I don't think that we could have had, and Professor Isaac doesn't like speaking anything about him. So instead of, before he catching him, I'll 3 sentences with your permission. I don't think that on this topic, we would have got a better person than Professor Isaac to chair this, because as you're aware, while India, Kerala was a pioneer in establishing science and technology institutions at the instance of, say, Achyuta Menon in the 70s. We had to wait almost 50 years till the 20 budget of Professor Isaac to explicitly articulate the role of science, technology, or knowledge in taking Kerala to its next development agenda. Professor Isaac? You are always, that we are one among you. I don't need to welcome you. We are extremely happy that you are here. On behalf of all around here, we most warmly welcoming you to this meeting. Professor Leela Gulati is here online. She told me that she has some difficulty in coming, so she is online there. Professor Leela, I don't know whether Priya has been able to join. Me too, it may be too early for him to join. So I on behalf of all of you here, I welcome the family members of Professor Yes Gulati. I note the presence of large number of, as I said, number of students, colleagues, friends of Yes Gulati, and large number of our young faculty members and young scholars. I'm extremely happy to note young scholars who are interested in issues. I know that this is the topic that attracted them, and equally, of course, that's why I thought I will. Since they are attracted by topic, I thought I'll talk about this the person also. So, with a lot of affection, as usual, lot of appreciation as usual, and lot of expectation, we, the GIFT community, and welcome all of you to this important gathering. So now I think I would like.
It's okay.
You.
Professor Ule.
Thank you, Professor Joseph, for setting the perfect tone for today's discourse. It's my privilege to now invite Professor T.M. Thomas Isaac, former Finance Minister of Kerala and distinguished professor at GIFT, to chair today's session while sharing his insights and guiding us through this intellectual journey.
Professor Ule, Professor Joseph, Professor Jose, Professor Kannan, Murdulipan, Pushpangadan, I just mentioned we colleagues were with the IS GULATI Center for Development Studies. Liju, we have indeed a very distinguished audience for this commemoration talk. Professor GULATI Memorial Lecture is indeed a very important event in the calendar of academic activities of GIFT. Now, today's address is going to be on a theme which would have been very dear to Professor GULATI, because he has been a participant in strategizing the democratic development of Kerala. Right from 1957. Professor Joseph mentioned how he came in 1957 to help the new government. Not just him. In fact, he told me how the four musketeers, led by Ashok Mitra, Ashok Rudra, Satyabrata Sen, and GULATI came on the request of E.M.S. Namboodiripad. But they were told not to talk to others about this. So three of them boarded from Calcutta. They wouldn't talk about where they're going to. They were friends, but they wouldn't talk. Then they landed in Nagpur. That was the system. All the flights of Indian Airlines, Air India would converge at Nagpur hub, then take off. So GULATI also landed there. They wouldn't tell each other where they're going. Finally, they found themselves boarding the same flight to Trivandrum. So they spent in fact, about more than a year here. Ashok set up the statistics department. Professor GULATI has in fact written a series of articles, three-part article titled Behind the Coir Curtain. The time is popular to say iron curtain, bamboo curtain for China. So he wrote about behind the car curtain. Okay. You know, Economy Weekly at the time. Economy Weekly. Yeah, at that time. Then, as Professor Joseph said, 1972, he came to CDS and was a participant in that big journey, trying to understand the development experience of Kerala. And policy-wise, do not hesitate, intervene and support the government in ways, like all other senior faculty members at CDS. And interestingly, he, along with Ken Raj and many others, was firm in belief that democratic decentralization was very vital to take the Kerala development project forward. Professor GULATI went beyond that, academic support to the idea. He traveled with me to every district in Kerala to address convention, to protest against the kind of affirmative legislation which was then thought of at that time in Kerala, and trying to present an alternative legislation, possibility of decentralized planning and so on. And it was a fortune that when he took over the second time as the state vice chairman, planning board vice chairman, he was able to guide the launch of People's Plan campaign, which is one of the most radical decentralization attempted anywhere. So, in fact, he had such total full confidence in us who are carrying that campaign. The kind of risk that was being taken today, I think you will not imagine, cannot imagine. See, without any kind of adequate preparation at the local level, without even a kind of statutes as to how a plan should be drawn out, or sufficient employees, and so on, a huge amount of money was going to be handed over. Nearly 40% of the plan. And the whole campaign was to ensure that this doesn't result in chaos, but will ultimately lead to, say, local planning and empowerment of the local governments. Okay. This is the part, Kerala development, part one, where this generation played a very important role. Now the part two. Despite the many welfare achievements, social sector achievements, Kerala is facing very acute unemployment problem, highest in the country. Any job wouldn't do. You'd need to create decent jobs which are acceptable to the educated labor force in Kerala, aspirants for employment in Kerala. How to generate such employment? That's the big challenge. So, as Joseph mentioned, in 2021-22 budget, a concept was put forward. The next stage of Kerala development would be transforming this economy into a knowledge economy, which would imply one, transformation of the technological basis of the present industry and agriculture. Two, attracting investment into high knowledge intensive industries and development sectors. And three, skilling the labor force so they can take up this employment that would be generated. Now, once you conceptualize Kerala's development in this manner, something which I understand that Ole accepts, then the challenge is how to go forward. There are three lines of action required. One, overcoming the infrastructure deficit of Kerala, which would imply increasing the public sector investment in infrastructure from something less than 1.5% to perhaps more than 3%. A big order, how to do that. Two, transforming the higher education Kerala from really merely transferring knowledge to producing knowledge and creating an environment of innovation. And three, a massive skilling program. I come for this commemoration lecture having formally accepted a role in this third program. Now, well, I would call this as social democratic development. Some of us wouldn't join that adjective of social democracy. Our notions may be different. Hopefully that this will lead to more radical changes in the system and so on. But that shouldn't matter. It's democratic. Good enough. It's democratic development path. He wants to explore what are the impediments, possible impediments to this march forward of this democratic project. The change in global situation, in the change in the nature of our domestic regime, and also the problems within Kerala and so on. Can this task be undertaken? I think I should leave it to him to explain his position. So please, sir.
And you come in late with all your criticism. Is this handled automatically? A miracle.
Someone will come.
A miracle will take place. Okay, good. Yeah, Professor Isaac, Professor Joseph, Professor Leila Gulati somewhere in that cloud or whatever it is called, and other family members, and of course, dear colleagues and friends. It's an honor to be here, privileged, and it's most of all, it's great fun. To be back and visit friends and share analysis. Let me pass that one. Now, things are happening in my screen here, but anyway. Now, it's not the first fiscal crisis in Kerala. In a conversation with Professor Gulati in his home in the late 90s, he agreed that Kerala's social democratic oriented human development was facing a fiscal crisis. But he did not accept the neoliberal thesis that deregulations for private profits and wealth before public welfare was inevitable to solve the problem. Instead, the human development model could be upgraded to generate more resources and foster production, especially by democratic decentralization, with popular participation in planning and implementation. And he said to me, we shouldn't talk more now. He kind of said, the scholarly activists in the planning board cell to foster this have my full support and know best, so you should talk to them. And I did, but the question was then, how realistic was this thinking? What should we measure against? And as Isaac said, I've chosen to compare, to measure against a kind of broad framework of broadly defined social democratic politics in terms of gradual socioeconomic development based on social justice with liberal democratic means. I would argue that there are hardly any one to the left these days that are sort of diverting from that general aim. And historically, if we can boil down this to two pillars to enable change, collective interest-based democratic movements, and there is the equal humanity and citizen-based democracy. Those are the pillars for the means. And then there are two policy pillars which are combined with each other: universal welfare and education as a basis for social and economic growth pacts between capital and labor, negotiated, kind of institutionalization of class structure. And that would be by way of 5 policy strategies. First, you can be elected into power, and you can try to dismantle reckless capitalism from above. You can tame it from above by various kind of welfare measures. You can resist it from below, of course, like trade unions and so on. You can escape it from below, not necessarily by being a hippie. There are other ways of doing it. You can form cooperatives and that sort of thing. And you can try to transform it by stocking new fish in the pond, as Eric Olin Wright would have put it, or as it was put in Scandinavia, by altering the rules of the game and strengthening the agents of change. From the early 20th century, Kerala had refuted the thesis that social democratic development was unviable in the South due to colonialism, uneven development, fragmented class structure, and limited democratic space, and you name it. Broad unity was possible for human rights, civil rights, health and education, land reform, workers' rights, independence, and a unified Kerala, in spite of the fragmented structures and so on, multicultural and whatnot. Informal labor could organize based on profession and market control. Even a poor state could remove chronic poverty and endemic deprivation if the investments in human capital fostered growth. And this was possible to coordinate by democratic education, mobilization, organization, and governments. So state capacity and anti-imperialism did not require authoritarian rule, which most other left-oriented movements and countries, including Indonesia, argued from the late 50s, and thus downgrading the importance of democracy. Kerala stood tall, and that's quite unique. Now, it's well known that the model stagnated from the 60s, and the common causes, we just recall them. The education was insufficiently democratized. Vulnerable sections of the population were excluded in the land reform. Land reform itself also could not be combined with democratic decentralization. And there were instances, and quite frequent at the time, political patronage and clientelism, though far from to the extent in West Bengal. We should remember that. Insufficient productive investments after the land reform were there. Gains from investments in education and skill rarely invested productively in Kerala, generating thus tax base for further social democratic reform. The benefits were mainly individual. And this fitted well with India's then neoliberalization from the 80s and onwards, masked by the remittances and increasing, and also along with increasing inequality. But the campaigns since the 80s for participatory local development, which Professor Gulati, among others, supported, did shape new democratic spaces beyond the entrenched organizations and their patronage and clientelism, and beyond the stalled state levels social growth pacts that had been attempted at. And it was possible to scale up the local efforts in Kerala at large when local politics projects were combined, 94, 96, in a framework to renew the Kerala model, and when there was a critical mass of activists and supporters who pushed for this, outside and inside, political organizations, and also contributed thereby to the electoral victory. And when democratic decentralization made it possible to combine, as you said, Isaac, direct popular participation and local democratic government, and 1/3 of the planning budget was transferred to the local institution, and state planning board could coordinate that. But there were also a number of problems remaining. We should remember that there were perhaps more top-down resources handed out than Professor Gulati's local mobilization, dreams of local mobilization of resources. There were a bit unclear links between direct and representative democracy and governance, which caused numerous quarrels. The same applied between state, district, cities, and the panchayats. The districts were never really fully democratized. You had less meritocracy and bonus for local development than, for instance, in China. There was an unresolved inclusion of the middle class and educated youth issues. So many of them said to me when I met educated youth, in the villages, they would say, "What's in it for us?" There were good results in many ways, but production through local growth pacts never really came about. And there were unresolved coordination of local and outside economic dynamics, a pet argument by Professor K.K. George. And there were unresolved inclusion, you could say, of old interest and political organization. And in the end, there was a political party hijacking in face of the 2000-2001 election. It's no secret. Now, several of these hurdles were addressed from 2016 and onwards. You had institutional reforms that stabilized local participatory and representative governance. Professor Halilali is not here now, no. But anyway, he was part of that, which proved crucial in fighting the floods and the pandemic, I think. And that renewed public action from below. I mean, Kerala quite remarkable. I remember writing an article in Sweden when I compared the success of Kerala in fighting COVID as compared to the supposedly advanced Scandinavian countries, especially Sweden. State welfare measures and leadership. Huh?
Couldn't believe in fighting it.
Yeah, well, now, come on. State welfare measures and leadership was added. It wasn't just local anymore. And central and political and bureaucratic experts govern missions. I deem them to be a bit top down. We can come back to that, I say. But they were added. And there were new resources for broadly defined infrastructure, also come back to that. But anyway, so this together generated better links between local and state, and local and the outside economy, no doubt. And there were more emphasis on attracting private direct investment. We can discuss how that happened, and what it's characterized with, but there were these more efforts. And there were your efforts with KIFBI to additional investment through state-guided and assured funds. A quite innovative attempt, I would say, that differed from the way in which West Bengal had tried to promote industrialization. So there was a statewide framework for knowledge-based development, including with change to local level production and services and skills. That was remarkable, I thought, when it was drawn up. And then you had these electoral successes also. But the new public action, as far as I understand, was not really sustained and sufficiently connected with the knowledge-based development, which in itself lost steam too. So the dynamics from 94 to 2000 was not really reinvented, I would argue. So the question is, can there be new critical mass for various progressive progress? Of course, you can't repeat the programs from 94 and that. I'm not arguing that, but can there be new critical mass for, we say, new programs that you can come together around? That's a question. Can there be direct and representative democracy and governance be better combined in linkages between state and local and public and private investments? And are there alternative ways of overcoming the fiscal crunch? So looking at at least those are the questions that come to my mind as the most important. And if I look at them, they are about politics and governance. But when I go through the documentation and so on, there are few signs of substantial discussion about that, including formats for partnership representation and governance in the missions and in efforts to combine state and private cooperation. I followed the Kerala Look Ahead conference, but aside from some remarks in Harilal's workshop there was very little about these things. Subsequent plans and budget papers and so on also didn't include much about it, or very, very little. And the priorities and projects of KIFBI, to the extent that I've been able to follow it, has not really focused on how is this governance best organized. I know you can argue that we can't have participation at the London Stock Exchange, but there are other levels as well. There was also not much on how to fight the globalized conservative nationalism, which the union government is part of. And if one looks at the ambitions in Kerala, undermines Kerala's external oriented knowledge-based development. So how do we go about it? Now, fortunately, Kerala is not an authoritarian developmental state. But since it isn't, there must, as China and Singapore and you name it. But since it isn't, it's thus crucial with some kind of alternative democratic partnership governance and coordination if you want to pursue this kind of knowledge-based development, I would argue. and not just leaving it to the market. So let me stick out my neck then from a comparative perspective. So I wonder, might experiences like those whom I'm coming to, I think there are 5 I've listed, be studied, adopted, perhaps improved? The first that I've come to my mind is policy-based, mission-driven politics. Policies, sorry. With alliances behind them, not just top-down, but with alliances behind them and partner representation in them through councils and similar. Let me give one example on that. It comes from a strange place like Indonesia, in the sense that it's a tough context to do this. It was in 2010 when the very, very fragmented progressive movement and trade unions managed to come together behind a proposal for a public health reform. And that was done in the process of drawing up an alternative proposal and then linking up with politicians who crossed the floor in the parliament because they realized this proposal might be successful, and they managed to win by doing that. Problem later on in following it up, but that's another matter in this context. The Brazilian case is also interesting because they had their participatory budgeting, as many of you know, and that was fine in many ways, but it didn't help people to really influence what was going on the regional and central level. So when there was corruption in Brasilia, in the capital, these local participants didn't stand a chance to affect it. So what has happened later on is the development of more regional conferences, forums for discussion, where NGOs, where social movements, trade unions, similar partners to development, and also from progressive entrepreneurs come together, try to discuss what priorities should be there, and then politicians participate in that, including President Lula, and it's their task to take it on. Now you can say they could just skip it and they wouldn't need to do it. But if you publish these resources, these discussions, and go public with them, it will be a bit difficult for these politicians to just ignore it when they move ahead. We have a lot of difficult experiences from this kind of things in Scandinavia in terms of what used to be called social corporatism. That is when partners to developments like trade unions, employers' organizations, professional organizations, and so on and so forth, in different issues come together to discuss commissions and similar things. A new, kind of renewed example, suggestion for how to go about it is put forward by Mariana Mazzucato's proposal, she's in London, of anchored missions, anchored mission-driven politics, if anyone wants to explore it. A second one is this democratic partnership representation in links between public and private, and local and central. I think, we can have a lot of planning. We can have planning boards. We can have all of public resources, but we need to, if we live in a situation where private investments and private entrepreneurship and so on remain very crucial, there need to be combination. These two much talk to each other, and there must be then some form of doing that in an institutional form that is stable. That is crucial for investors. If Kerala was to compete, you shouldn't compete on low wages with Gujarat or Bangalore or something. You should compete on the basis of stability and a stable governance framework, which serious industry will be attracted by. Again, we have a lot of Scandinavian examples, and Mazzucato's mission-driven social contracts on new industrial strategies that she has written about is particularly enlightening on this issue, I would suggest. Now I come to the most, you will now accuse me of being an awful syndicalist or something. But, you know, I have a third proposal, which is that in addition to the critique of the union government on share taxes and public spending for investments and taxation of wages and capital, I think that to gain resources, we have to go to the source. That is, by facilitating the source of value, of resources generated by investments. We mobilize returns on investments by facilitating employee-owned and managed firms and reinvented cooperatives, if that is possible, in strategic sectors that are then meant for sustainable growth. In other words, staff with human capital hire capital instead of capital hiring the employees.
For a second, on your the third one, by investment resources, by facilitating employee-owned and managed firms, you mean public sector?
No.
No.
Employee-owned.
But we don't have that kind.
No, but you could have.
Could have.
Owned by the employees. Now, what I'm suggesting is this: you should try. Yeah. So the idea would be to, I mean, theoretical term is the staff with human capital that hire capital rather than capital hiring them.
Sounds like Yugoslavia.
Yeah, but it doesn't necessarily have to be Yugoslavia. No. With the firms and forthcoming returns on collateral for loans and investment. It's like you buy your house and the house is the collateral. Now the human capital is your collateral and the company you invest. This is not unusual in many countries. It's quite unusual in Scandinavia because there has been a kind of closed box, you could say, by trade unions compromising and negotiating with capital, and they had agreements in their social pacts on this. But in many other countries, this is not at all unusual. It can be in the cooperative forms. It can be by company-owned factories. And the good thing about it is, of course, that you then can one of the good things about it is that it's become more democratic, and you can lend the investment you need not be government assured. It is through the private operation. Not even Modi can stop it. So that's my first. And let me give one example of how it can happen, which comes from my country. Some of you may know of the Swedish car Volvo, which is truck making and ordinary cars. It was for some time great. One of the largest owners were actually Ford, was getting into it because there was a need for more capital coming into Volvo, and they wanted more. So then they were looking around, and there were attempts to link up with France and Renault and all that. But then the engineers in the company, a professional organization, right, of engineers, said we are prepared to take over. We take over the company. We have a viable plan for raising lending the money, and we invest our human capital in this, and we are prepared to do it. Now it was quite viable. Now this was blocked because one of the creditors would be a pension fund, and in that pension fund there were representatives of the other trade unions, and they thought that you shouldn't do this. You shouldn't take over companies, so they blocked it. But that was the only reason why it was stopped. And if they had taken over, the Chinese wouldn't have bought up Volvo. It would have been owned by the personnel, the employees. These kind of firms could be obliged to contribute funds for common and societal purposes, of course. with broader stakeholder representation. In a similar way as it was thought that wage earners funds would be set aside for investments, but with broader stakeholder representation. You could share comparative insights in a kind of GULATI workshops towards policy package proposals for things like this. Put forward it for public discourse and back it up by critical mass. Now, finally, the issue of the international cooperation against India and worldwide conservative nationalism. How does one do that? I think first it's important to understand what conservative nationalism is about. So just very briefly, look at this figure. There are two dimensions, right? One is about the nation state, the other is about the demos, the nationalism, okay? The nation state can be, of course, unitary or federative, but it can be more authoritarian or it can be more democratic from below. On the other scale, you have the demos, the people. It can be more human and equal citizen rights-based, supported by international solidarity, and it can be more based on nativism, ethnic, religious, specific group interest. Now, what we are talking about now is the movement towards the upper right corner, where you combine authoritarianism with nativism, ethno-nationalism, religious nationalism, and that kind. And this is not just about inside the existing nation states. The increasing numbers of wars and conflicts are about redefining the nation state in accordance with nativism and ethnic and religious divisions. So it's important in that sense. So one can ask them what made this conservative nationalism so important? Well, this is how I would try to sort of simplify, explain it. You have on the baseline, you have the neoliberal globalization, you have shallow democratization during the third wave of democracy, and these two processes undermine progressive alternatives, no matter whether they were, social democratic oriented or even more leftist oriented. They were all undermined. And in the middle of that, conservative nationalism came up as a reaction, in response to frustration with these developments. Now, we don't have neoliberal globalization anymore. We have more global state-supported capital and oligarchic competition coming up, and autocratization, and further undermine progressive alternatives. So this is what we are up against. And so then we could say, this generates conflicts. It undermines the very basis for modern, that is, evidence-based development through the media platforms of Musk and others. And it undermines the world economic development, and not least the United Nations regulations and programs, which actually were drafted in the late 40s and 50s, much thanks to the rise of the non-aligned movement that added to that process. And they are all crucial for Kerala's external-oriented, I would say, knowledge-based development. This more openness. So the question one might ask, what could be done here now? Might there be an interest in linking up with the countries such as Brazil and movements for a new non-alignment internationalism, including within the UN framework rather than the Washington consensus, in mission-driven social pacts for sustainable investments? That's what I had to suggest and say. Thank you.
So now,
I think before opening, can we request the chair of the session to honor Professor Olle and give him a memento before the questions? Where is that? That's it. Yeah, finish it off. This is.
all right, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I know. Thank you very much.
This is a memento for him.
How am I going to put this down into the bag in the end?
That's going to be a problem.
You'll manage, don't.
Thank you so much. Okay.
So thank you.
Where should I?
So I don't want to sum up. Obviously, Professor Ole is very sympathetic to what is being attempted in Kerala, but is more skeptical about the potential of this new transition to Kerala's development project. Primarily because of the changed international situation and also the new ultranationalist government which is in place, which does not accept diversities. Here is a state trying to strike an independent, autonomous development path, something which it had successfully traversed in a journey starting from the colonial times, when rest of the India was not looking even at the social sectors. Here was a state which very consciously chose, not the policymakers, the people chose through their struggles and forced the state to devise education health policies so that universal provisioning of this service did take place in Kerala. So there was a time, even within the colonial framework, the region could strike out an independent ball. Now, under the changed circumstances, it's going to become much more difficult to keep along this course and make a course correction, which is very important, which is the transition to knowledge economy. He has enumerated the kind of impediments. Well, I leave it to you think, contemplate whether it be possible to overcome them. But an important suggestion that he has made is certain kind of how to bring about more efficiency in the kind of mission mode, kind of interventions that is being made, how they could be made more democratic or linked to local democracy, and perhaps the opposite of it, linking up with the similar movements and attempts that are being made internationally, potential for doing that. It is not going to be a neoliberal globalized world, but autarkic, breaking up into regions and also into autarkic states. And that presents the possibility of a region within the country of linking up with some of these new potentials that is being created. That seems to be his argument. Now, I would suggest that he would take 2 or 3 comments and or questions together rather than each one. But it will be very helpful if all the interventions are, say, kept to say something like 5 minutes maximum. That's it.
That's quite liberally.
Oh, thank you. I'm so because Professor Kannan was sitting there.
Isaac, I want half a minute
Yep.
just to ask you, yes, Ale, because you talk about knowledge-based development as the objective. You know, currently what the government of Kerala is at least publicly enunciating is knowledge economy. Are they the same? Or you have a different conception of knowledge-based development?
Yes, any takes on that? Anybody want to join this issue so that this can be addressed? Yeah, I understand. Fine.
Well, what do you think?
Ever yours.
No, by taking the same question from
Mike, some kind of.
sorry, taking that same question from Kannan, Professor Kannan. Let me say the concept of a knowledge economy is it's operationally it is premised on a lot of supply side interventions, enhancing skills, improving the knowledge climate, investing heavily in research and development, and above all, making a huge army of well-trained professionals. Essentially, an intervention from the supply side. But then that does not automatically guarantee the functioning of a knowledge economy, because you have to go a long way towards generating demand for that manpower, which is possible, as Isaac suggested, with the, you also mentioned, with the kind of infrastructural investment. So these are essentially supply side interventions where the state has done a commendable job, and it has a long way to go. But then my question is, conservative nation state, whichever garb it takes, is it ever opposed to the idea of a knowledge economy? I doubt very much. I doubt very much. I mean, because all of us are for that. And all of us want that kind of an economy to function well, to assume greater potential. And I don't think, it's more an imaginary confrontation insofar as I can see that people are opposed to the knowledge economy developing, taking wings. That's my one more point. I'm not able to connect the dots.
You're not.
Able to connect the dots about the various regions in time and space, let me say Indonesia, Brazil, Scandinavia, where collaborative efforts, you say, have made a difference. But do they conform to a pattern worthy of emulation in other regions? I know it's as much vague a question, but then I trust you will understand what I mean is what's happening in what happened in Indonesia, what's happening in Brasilia, what happened in Scandinavia in the past, which I think was by far one of the most eminent, a model to be emulated. Do they have anything in common?
Yes, Professor Pale.
It's just as well. I have to confess, I'm not quite sure the major difference between knowledge economy and knowledge-based development, but maybe there is an important difference. You please enlighten me on that. But from my point of view, what it involves is to continue to work on the historical great emphasis in, as I understand it, Kerala's history on education, and well, history-wise, of course, a way of getting a share in the colonial production that was there once upon a time, and also get into public administration, and then later on being a major base for, you would say, getting jobs, well paid or reasonably well paid jobs in other places around the world, including in the Gulf areas and so on and so forth. That's the history of it as I broadly see it. But there's also another part in it, which is, of course, a broader education in terms of, as I recall from my reading into the Kerala's history, that you in each village you had a farmers organization, you had a workers organization, and you had a library organization, meaning you had an emphasis on popular education, which was crucial for Kerala's democratic development and participatory development. So there are that aspect to it as well. Now, so then the question is, to what extent can this sort of generate not just, sorry, can this generate growth, and to what extent can there also be a demand side in that process? Well, I come from a country where education was and a region where education in that broad sense was the backbone of democratization. If we go back to the late 19th century, when the public school system was drawn up in the Scandinavian countries, that became the backbone of the later on democratization that took place. There was a liberal branch of it, there was a worker movement branch of that. And there was also very important from the very start, an important women's organizational part of that. And I think that was the basis for stability in the process of democratization, where workers could participate almost as much as others in the public discourse and in study circles and in reading and writing and all that. So it was very important, and it was also important in later on in developing basic skill training in the industries and so on. Now we are not just talking about, I always had this joke about when I came here one of the first times, and I was supposed to meet an agricultural extension officer, and I put on my rubber boots I thought we would go out in the field, but I happened to find myself in a panchayat office where a very, very well dressed up lady began by asking me about Ingmar Bergman films. Ingmar Bergman's recent films.
Bergman,
Famous
Swedish film.
producer around the globe. Anyway, yeah. So it's a question. So it's a question about, of course, what kind of education we generate here. Now, there has been an enormous emphasis at least in the context of Scandinavia, on what you could broadly say, engineer training, industrial knowledge-based training, skill training, and all that kind of thing. I mean, other things were there as well, of course, but what it indicates is that it's not just about knowledge, whatever knowledge. It's about broad knowledge, but it's also about knowledge that is directly needed in the kind of industrial and broadly speaking, economic development that you're giving priority to. Now, so then the demand side of it. Well, first of all, 2 points. During the Fordist era, so sort of when we had Keynesian policies possible to carry it out, that worked brilliantly. These well-trained people could contribute to the industrial development, and they were paid sufficiently enough to buy the products as well. And there was also export trade, and that export was increasingly important. And you could say that in addition to the domestic demand, it was very, very much export-driven development, especially in Sweden, which I think is the point here in Kerala as well. So it's not just about, creating the demand inside Kerala. There's a lot of demand here already, but there's also the basic idea would be to get the engineers who construct the airports in the Gulf area to set up their consultancy firms here instead, and sell and export their knowledge. That's one thing, right? So export possibilities we in this world we have to consider. That's how
May I supplement you? I think Professor Kannan raised a very important point. The knowledge-based development, or better knowledge society, as distinct from knowledge economy. That's an important distinction. knowledge society or knowledge-based development is a much broader concept. More than along with economics, it would imply a scientific temper, progressive culture, secularism, the societal concerns, and also ensuring there's egalitarian and non everybody's inclusive development. So in fact, UNESCO and so on use this concept of knowledge society. But its economic base would be knowledge economy. Now, I remember in 21 March, there was a lot of thinking we did whether to use the term knowledge society or knowledge economy. I finally chose knowledge economy because that is where the intervention had got to be. Otherwise, it will get lost in the broader cultural milieu of that the discourse that takes place often in Kerala. So now the question of A.V. Jose, what about demand? Okay, see, you are skilling people, you're transferring education and so on. But how do you ensure there is going to be demand? Demand would be created by the innovation based new firms that would come up or investment that would take place. But that is going to be a slightly lengthy process. It's not going to take place overnight. It would require maybe a decade. So in the interim period, how do you meet this demand gap? Okay, you're skilling people, you're motivating people and so on. Then where do you get the employment? That's the question that you raised. And that's why Kerala Knowledge Economy Mission becomes important. That's in this period, you mobilize jobs from the international market or national market, which Kerala would require only a small percentage of that. With the brand name of Kerala, you should be able to mobilize them, then provide employment there. Not only outside, provide employment working from home or working near home. That was the conceptualization that was done. But as I don't know if you specifically meant that, but this is precisely where it has not taken off. Really, see, that this demand for job, the demand side. He also mentioned about missions not maybe to meet the targets, not being much participatory enough, and so on. There's a problem there. So what he said was a real problem. Well, though it is the last period of this government, I thought we'll pitch in and see if that demand can be generated. A new effort will be made. So not giving up. A new effort is going to be made.
I say, I forgot one of the questions from this kind of, how to say, partnership governance. Can it be applied in other contexts as well? There are examples, but of course you can't copy the Scandinavian model, because we have unusually strong employers organization and unusually strong and consolidated employers organization and trade unions still, right? Which has kind of locked it also, a problem with it. It is locked into a box, right? So because they can't even accept other solutions than to negotiate with themselves. But I think that, well, the Brazilians have tried to modify it. It hasn't taken off as well as these kind of regional discussion forums and so on that I also mentioned, but there have been attempts at it. They tried in South Africa, but it didn't fail because of that. It failed because they didn't manage to include representation and consider the enormous mass of people without permanent employment. So you've got a kind of Scandinavian model in the formal sector, if you like. And that, of course, has to be adjusted for. That's the tragedy of South Africa. They tried the Scandinavian model and didn't work because they didn't consider the fact that you didn't have that strong, quick, you had such an unemployment problem and you had this unorganized sector. So, but there are examples. We can go down and see how it worked. I see regional examples of it in other contexts. But of course, it is difficult. Then you have an authoritarian way of doing it from East Asia, in Singapore. No, sorry, in South Korea. But that's authoritarian driven. We shouldn't pick up that one. But the very idea is not impossible. And then we have the slight other version of it, which is this Italian lady whose name I've already forgotten. I had put it in the lecture, Makuchi something, Masakuto or something else. Yeah, Masakuto, where she suggests to further develop the model within the framework of mission-driven politics and have that cooperation encapsulated, framed by mission-driven politics.
Just a rider with the permission of the chair. What you said calls for a great deal of collective effort, and it's a huge challenge. But then it's much more difficult in ethnically heterogeneous, diverse societies. Social democracies succeeded remarkably in ethnically homogeneous societies. And even in East Asia, Korea, China, the ethnic homogeneity is an important factor influencing the success of any model imposed from top or demanded from the lower levels. Nonetheless, the homogeneity you find in any society is a significant factor influencing the course of development, which certainly worked well and wonderfully well in social democratic Scandinavia. There's much to learn from that, and I hope that model will gain universal ascendancy one way or the other through this kind of collective.
Very brief, Jos. The Indonesian case in an even more diverse context with the public health reform proves that you're wrong. It is possible.
Okay, Mridul, please. And then
Really sticking my neck out. You mentioned it in your presentation also about this collaboration between the public and the private. It was something which we had been discussing in the planning board also some time back. For this creation of employment, you have to take on the private sector. How, and you discussed, how to train the like internships or things like that, how to do that in this knowledge economy. Why can't you, and with the social contract also in mind? Because we have to keep obviously everybody happy. So with social contract and with a greater partnership, because I think about it, you have to draw in the private sector in some ways to help in the development process. And how do we do it? So that's something, that's why I'm saying I'm sticking my neck out. How can we do it? Or is it possible to do it? You suggested it in your, one of the solutions you have made is one of that. So how can we do it in our own economy and our own polity in a way?
Siddiq.
I'll be quick. Actually, it is an addition. And that is, when we speak about the knowledge economy as a base, whether it is an economy or society is a different problem. Still, if that is the case, then the question is that there is an increasing discussion on the supply, that is the government being the steerer of the whole change. But where is the demand? Within, that is what is actually the local level or the grassroots level movement on this question of knowledge economy or knowledge society as a front runner. Just what happened in the earlier history, if you check with Kerala, for example, the People's Plan movement or the other trajectories which we all discuss, 4 or 5 trajectories of Kerala we can discuss. Everywhere, the mobilization as well as the kind of intervention from the part of population, that is people, was very much evident. But in this case, are we leaving this to some entrepreneur or the capital or the state, or we are going to actually basically build a momentum from the grassroots within the people, which is a very important question for me. And that is what is my apprehension too on this aspect. Thank you.
One more question. Yes, Professor.
I just want
Ah,
to get
Meena.
some insights from you.
Could you take a microphone?
Take your mic, there's also.
I can speak from it. No, see, when we talk about this knowledge economy, it is high technology. So much of high technology is involved. So, no, but when I read Indian economy, more than Kerala economy, but the service sector also you find a lot of technology involved. Service sector is also emerging. So when we really look at our organized sector, Indian context, we find that contractualization is more in the large size, high tech sectors. So when it comes to the low tech and small sized, they use more of a labor, especially replacing men with women. And because they want, anyway, they won't get any job. So whatever job they get, they're happy to work more and get more wage. So what is the experience in your country? And then can we really, when I was connecting to all these questions, and can we have so much of hope from this kind of knowledge economy?
Yeah, I partly misunderstood this concept of demand. I mean, now I understand it's not just about buying power, kind of. It's demand for a policy. Is that correct? Yeah.
No, when the economists talk about.
Yeah, I know. So we have both, right? Yes. So we have.
Yeah, there are two concepts which came. Professor Jose was speaking about demand from employers,
Yeah.
demand for job. How do you generate it?
Okay.
Professor Dr. Siddiq was, his remark was about now the involvement of the people.
Yeah.
In the
Okay.
whole program, process supply or demand.
Mm.
Is as if there are skilling agencies which will do the skills, and then there are these employers who come and hire, which is not
Right.
happening. So he's asking where is that participation of the people, which has been the tradition.
Yeah. Okay. So, of course, I can't solve this issue.
I must not do that.
Anyway, but let me begin with this generation of employment in that Scandinavian experience, which somebody asked for. We were very fortunate in the sense that, and this sounds like an irony of it all, in the sense that, okay, we got this compromise between capital and labor, so we could reduce the number of labor conflicts, and it became competitive in that sense. We also increased the technological development in the less developed sector because they had to measure up to a universal standard of wage agreements, which were across the board. So if you couldn't pay according to the collective labor agreements, the standards that were set by the export industry to be competitive, then if the low technology industries couldn't improve themselves sort of to pay higher wages and still exist, they had to close down. So then the question is, of course, why was it possible to employ all these people who were retrenched and all that? And that was very much due to the increasing international competitive, the bargaining power of the export industry that was gaining, that They benefited from these collective labor agreements, so they could keep the wages on a decent level, but yet on a competitive level internationally. And Mr. Hitler was involved in building up his army. And that was a very big export market at the time for the Scandinavian industry, unfortunately. You could say. So, yeah, no, but we have to admit that was a factor here. So there must be an export market if you want to do this. Now, that worked in the case of Korea and South Korea and Taiwan as well, for reasons we don't need to dwell into, but I think are well understood. So the question is, can you have something similar in this case in Kerala? I think you can, but then the world can't be divided by the right-wing nationalists, as it is. But if you have more strategic cooperation on publicly fostered, facilitated investment, I'm not saying all the money should come from the state, but facilitated by employee-owned companies and others who have human capital. If you have cooperation on such investments with like-minded, state governments in other countries, like Brazil, like wherever, you can develop into not just local strategic investment sectors, but you can develop it across the borders. And that would possibly fit a little bit better into the emerging global disorder, if I may put it like that, than the abandoned neoliberal order. I could say much more, but I think that's,
Yeah.
I would
We'll
do that.
take a round of questions from the online participants. But just before that, both Ole's and Siddiq criticism, I would accept. But it is not something that cannot be overcome, this problem. So I'll just give an example and stop. Suppose you are going to have massive skilling of, or say, all the final students in Kerala, which would be some 3.5 lakh. If you had Polytechnic and ITA, more than 4 lakh. All right. Now, you have to look at international and national industrial demand. What are the skills demanded which would result in employment, not standard skilling practice? Then present to the students a menu of skilling programs and the probability getting employment if you study. And a massive program, say something like 2 lakh students participating. Now, what would be the requirement? One, the community pressure on the students to do it, the family included. Two, the alumni of each institution or worldwide, they would join this program. They would become individual mentors of every student, you see. Now, I don't think anybody has asked them. This will be forthcoming readily. Now, this is what I would say, people's participation in the skilling problem. Without that, this cannot succeed. Agency-based skilling program cannot be succeed. This is something that Kerala maybe should experiment. Sorry, online, please do join. You can switch on your mic and speak. Yeah, there are more people online.
Sir, good evening, sir. All of you.
Yeah.
Sir, if this type of economy will develop, and if this much people, students will go out from our state, the previous or the continuous flow of these students to outside this state or country, then how they will come back and stay in our state or in our country if these are the conditions prevailing in our states.
Yes, Anybody else wants to speak from online? We have just about 10 more minutes. After, yes, Jiju, please.
So you have been talking about conservative nationalism. The way in which this conservative nationalism gets manifested in the working of the government, particularly in Kerala, and also those states which not go by the standards of the central government for that matter, is something which is beyond our expectation. So it is going to mar the very basic structure of decentralization which we have been able to build all these years. So, in fact, I would point out one incident where the central government has started insisting on implementing certain programs as a distorted version of decentralized planning, which we have developed in Kerala. And they are trying to impose so many conditionalities upon us, even putting the hand into the resources that we have, which we give. We proudly say we are giving as much as 28% of the total plan funds. And even in spending that money, the central government has started putting their hands, laying rules and regulations. So I think you have been citing examples of various countries, and Kerala, I do not know whether we would be able to exercise that kind of freedom in doing things. That is something which we have to discuss in the context of what we experience.
If I'm permitted, I suppose. All are equal, I suppose. I can also ask you, not a question, yeah, right.
Yeah, more than
Yeah, no, we have been talking quite a lot, but still, I thought Ole's lecture and it was in fact should be provoking all of us because we can take, he also takes, is very appreciative of Kerala's development. We have a lot to claim. But during the last 10 years, out of eight out of 10 years, Kerala's GSDP growth rate was lower than the national level. Post 90, Professor Kannan would argue that up to 21, 22, I think his data, Kerala's GSDP growth rate was lower than national level. Of course, we have been trying our level best to do many things, but things are not moving the way we wanted. Because if we are not even keeping up the national level, it's something, given our endowment, something that we should be worried about. And a couple of comments about knowledge. Unfortunately, when you talk about knowledge and knowledge economy, we are talking about two types of knowledge. One is scientific knowledge, documented, coming out of formal learning process and R&D. It can be readily transferred. Equally important is synthetic knowledge, which is, we would say, experience-based knowledge. That is also equally important, but the development of an economy or a society depends upon to what extent you are able to fully utilize and move up. Because that is what, when the knowledge economy mission, when you're talking about bringing people skilling up, that's actually a different kind of thing. In that context, there's a question. In fact, there is a kind of questioning. Can you have the distinction between skilled labor and unskilled labor? Who is unskilled? Nobody is unskilled. In fact, the conventional definition of skilled labor and unskilled labor has been critiqued in this perspective. Now, the question which we need to ask is, in the decentralization context, we have giving 28% to the panchayat level. I think there is evidence to show that this has been taken mostly by people at the lower level. In the Grama Sabha participation, if you are thinking of a heterogeneous society in Kerala or any society, society is heterogeneous. I don't think that my wife or your wife will go to the panchayat and ask for 2 kori and 5 eggs or whatever. There are people at the lower level, they will go, they participate, but there is a higher up society. They have money to invest, they have more knowledge, there are no social capital, they can also be effectively harnessed to invigorate the economy, which I don't know how much we have done. Our focus on Kudumbasri, wonderful, world's largest, wonderful. They are cultivating paddy field, wonderful. But then in the whole process, how we missed out a segment of the society which could have been investors by themselves. It is here that I would like to take Ole's idea of, instead of workers employing the managers, managers employing the workers, because going by the typical behavior of Kerala labor who are overeducated in every sphere, the so-called managerial utility function, which will not happen in Kerala. I mean, I don't want to, this is a different story. So what I'm trying to say that this is time, I must thank Ole for provoking us. We, most of us sitting here are economists. We should be provoked sufficiently and we should get out of our complacence. And we have to think in terms of new paradigms. Global context has its problems. Global context, that's also very much to be alerted. I think in that sense, we should be he has, I think that he should be, this lecture should be something that provokes us up appropriately. Masukato's mission, he has talked all that. I mean, I don't want to elaborate on that. Thank you very much.
So after Professor Kannan's
Yeah, just
intervention.
just a clarification, factual one. What Professor Joseph said is correct, that the Kerala's aggregate growth rate was somewhat slightly lower than national average. It's not very significant, 0.4 percentage point or so. But you have to add one more line to it, which I did, that if you work out the per capita growth in income, Kerala is higher than the national. And I said the difference is our demographic dividend. So from an economic performance, overall performance point of view, it is better than the national average on a per capita basis, which is very important. Second, I think what Dr. Jiju said is very important. You are a state, you are not a sovereign country. When you are part of, you are a subnational entity in a larger national context where policies are set there, your degree of freedom to operate is limited. But my argument has been that even where we can have our own innovations and our own way of doing things, but the whole question of effective demand will remain. Otherwise, we would not have so much of out-migration of our younger population. So that question, of course, doesn't come within this framework, I suppose. I'll add one more sentence, that while I admire the Scandinavian model, which Ole now is saying, in the new context is really getting unraveled, that's not our natural comparator. Our natural comparators are Asian. So if you want to improve your education, don't go to Finland. It's a different context, different history. Scandinavia, 4 million people in Sweden with such large resources, a long historical time for development, Hitler willing to buy their products, the migration to United States from Scandinavia. So it's a very different picture altogether. But I admire that model, although one regrets that it is being challenged from within conservative nationalists there. Thank you.
Now, finally,
Shall I ask?
you, Anida also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Professor Ole, I would like to ask one question. As in Kerala, investment in education and health by the government not generated tax base. You already mentioned that for further social democratic reforms. Actually, it leads to our financial crisis also. In which way we can address or overcome this crisis, according to your opinion? What is your takeaway?
I'll try to be short now. How do you attract private sector? What do you do with the brain drain issue? There were similar questions along that line. Well, my argument is that you can compete in various ways. You can attract in various ways. You can have lower wages. You can exploit nature more. You can do all kinds of things like that. But you shouldn't, of course. So what is the best way of doing it? I think is this kind of a governance model which is stable, where the actors can discuss and over a rather long period of time know that these are stable rules and regulations. No matter if another government is coming in, we have some basic agreement between capital, labor, and other stakeholders in this process. That is a basic factor. That stability has been a basic factor in Scandinavia. It was fixed in an authoritarian way in East Asia. We don't want to have that model. And I think that is also, if you have such an environment that facilitate, possibilities of starting up employment, employee-owned factories in a good way, you can also perhaps attract some people to come back and base themselves here. Now, what about this the freedom to act well and the tax base and all that? Well, that's another reason why I think we have to go down to that, if I put it, production level, and have working relationship with people who generate surplus on that level, and engage in what could be looked upon as a private area, which can be sort of you can negotiate a kind of taxation, not official taxation, but you can arrange joint fundings, joint funds for collective ventures and so on that level, without necessarily then you avoid the taxation limit, and you avoid this accusation of taking loans which are guaranteed by the state. So that's the, and then finally, what I would think in terms of knowledge is, I mean, people, this is not just, and it has to do also with demand in terms of who would push for it. Where is that, critical mass that would back up these kind of efforts? Well, if I compare with my own experiences from elsewhere, it is when people see an avenue of how to make a better life in the future. In Scandinavia, it was very much related to education. You take your basic education in school, you can advance over the years into, you can become a skilled laborer, you can become an engineer, you can do this and that. That fostered, when people saw that was a possibility of advancing into a better life and contribute to a better society. That was a absolutely crucial factor in it. And it wasn't just fostered by trade union, labor and employee cooperation. It was also very much fostered through their cooperation to build up good higher education. The technical universities in Sweden are not just publicly funded. They are funded in cooperation between the big companies and their need for certain education and the public sector. So there are a whole range of possibilities that can, I think, be mobilized by a little bit better governance. I admit that Evie Jaws has a good point in saying it's much more difficult in plural societies with a less unified class struggle and less unified organizations and all that. But my idea, what I have seen, is that there is a possibility to unite behind policy packages. And that's why I think this lady from London, Maracucci or something, has a point in doing that behind mission-driven participatory efforts. Thank you.
So I think we are closing the session. I'm certain those who have been listening have gained a lot of insights into what is happening today in Kerala. And we realize it's not totally unique. There are so many comparable events taking place in the rest of the world. And therefore, it underlines the importance of learning from them. And well, I'm very happy that you are not totally skeptical about the potential of making this transition, only conditional reservations. Thank you very much. It has been very good.
To formally conclude this commemoration lecture, I invite Dr. Nirmal Roy, Assistant Professor at GIFT, to deliver the word of thanks.
Good evening, all respected chair, dignitaries present here as well as online. It's an honor and privilege to propose a vote of thanks on behalf of Gulati Institute on Finance and Taxation to this event being held to commemorate Professor I.S. Gulati. Let me be very quick and brief. Firstly, let me thank our former chairman and former finance minister. Even though he is part of the gift fraternity, for mere purpose of formality, let me express our sincere thanks for bringing a lot of insights from your areas such as democracy, public action, decentralization, et al. And your interventions have enriched and elevated the discussion in a great manner. Thank you, sir. Now, our star of the day, Professor Ole Thornquist, Emeritus Professor of the Politics and Development of University of Oslo. Sir, your decade-old experience in the realm of democracy, public action, decentralization, and um, work in the developing countries perspective, especially in Indonesia as well as in Kerala. And thank you for celebrating, first of all, the Kerala case. However, your ideas with in a critical and skeptical and also in novel ways, solutions you have provided have enriched our understanding of Kerala, in fact, much more broadly. So thank you on behalf of the whole audience as well as the great fraternity, a big thanks and a big hug. Now, let me propose the vote of thanks to the guests and family members of Professor I.S. Gulati who have joined us online, and all the colleagues of Professor I.S. Gulati who have come here and joined us, and policy heads from the planning board, faculty and students from departments outside GIFT, and all the general public for joining us here and making the event a great success. And thanks are also due to the faculty and staff and students of GIFT for joining us here. And not the least, let me also offer a great thanks to Professor KJ Joseph for organizing this event in a very quick and successful manner. Thank you, sir. So let us wind up the session and move for a high tea that is waiting outside. Thank you.